Hello everybody, and welcome back to this afternoon's proceedings at the Start-up Festival. Hope you enjoyed this morning and took away lots of useful points. I think there was a huge amount of experience on hand there. I hope you also had some great meetings in the breaks and over lunchtime, and perhaps had a little rest from the screen. It's great this afternoon to be talking in a bit more depth about building your team. I think it's been, it's been a theme that's run through this morning, and we know how critical it is. We've got Natalie, Kevin, and Charlotte here to talk to us about this afternoon. So I'm going to hand over to Charlotte Caseborn, who's CEO of Theolytics and also on the BIA board. It's wonderful to have you here, Charlotte, to lead this panel and introduce the speakers. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jane. Well, welcome everybody to this session on building your team for success. I think we've got a medley of kind of both ideas and lived experience to share today, which will hopefully be interesting, informative, and spark some ideas. So we'll start off with a few introductions. We've got 10-minute presentations from three of us today. We're going to start off with Kevin, then Natalie, and then myself. And then we've got about 20 or 30 minutes or so at the end to dive into any questions or ideas or thoughts that you want to at the end. So just to kick off, I'm Charlotte. As Jane said, I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Theolytics. We are a preclinical therapeutics company harnessing viruses to combat disease. And since starting the company 3 years ago, we've built a team that is now about 20 people working together to discover and develop new cancer therapies. And I'm looking forward to sharing a few thoughts that I have, and I hope will help you guys build your teams for success. So that's me. I will just hand over to Natalie to do a quick introduction from her side.
Hello, everybody. So I am the CEO of the VIADIS Group. We are an executive search and organizational advice consultancy dedicated to life science, and more precisely dedicated to biotech startups, newcos, working with investors, and we've been in that space for the last since 2007, so 14 years. And prior to that, I was an IP lawyer in the biotech industry. My last position was actually with an investor, so actually the SocGen. So that's me, and we are a team of 10. We've got offices in Boston, offices in Barcelona, at the Biopole in Lausanne, in Switzerland, and the headquarters are in Oxford, UK.
Gosh, so teams spread all over the place. Hopefully there'll be some insights on navigating that. And Kevin.
Great. Well, thanks to you, Charlotte, and the BIA for the invitation. First of all, starting companies and building teams are two of my favorite activities, at least in the work context. So thrilled to be here and share my experiences. So I've been fortunate to spend my 15-year or so career in basically founding and building life science companies with a couple of detours into venture capital and a stint in larger biotech. So as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the States originally. I grew up in the Boston, Cambridge ecosystem. I did my PhD at MIT in the late 90s and then landed out of that into the startup scene there. And, sort of spent my career really at the nexus of novel science, using venture capital to fund it, but really focused on building teams to turn that promise, the promise of the science, into reality. And so before moving to the UK, I spent 3 years with Atlas Venture, where I built a couple of companies and was first-time CEO. And I'll share some of my lessons learned from that. Moved to the UK 5 years ago. I spent a couple of years at Immunocore, where I was Chief Strategy and Business Officer, and then moved back into company creation with SV Health Investors, where I've been a venture partner for about the last 3 years. So my role today, I'm a full-time CEO of Inara Bio, where we're focused on developing novel cell therapies to treat cancer, with really an emphasis on reaching much broader patient populations than the first wave of cell therapies, and we'll spend some time on that. I'm also a co-founder and exec chair of a company called Catamaran Bio based in Boston. It's focused on CAR-NK-based cell therapies for oncology. I helped put that company together, built the management team, raised a Series A last year, all from London during a global pandemic. So I think in terms of startup journeys, that's not one I would recommend, but we can touch on that. So that's me in a nutshell. I think, and I'll just end, I think, that's what I've done. It doesn't really capture, I think, sort of the essence of who I am and what I'm passionate about, though. And I think for me, my purpose and what I'm driven by is really on creating environments where people can flourish in the companies that we set up and run. And I really view this as honestly my primary day job as a CEO. And I think, we're fortunate to be in an industry where we all have a noble purpose of trying to make medicines that are going to benefit patients, but it's also really hard, and we're going to fail more than we succeed. And so I guess my view has increasingly become over the years, if we can all help each other along the way to become better people and better at what we do and feel happier and more fulfilled each day, I think that's also a pretty noble purpose to go alongside with creating better medicines. And so share a little bit more on how that is sort of reflected in how I think about building teams and companies in a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. And I was going to suggest that in a bit is right now.
Okay, fantastic.
I'll
just keep going.
Introduction. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, good. So I thought in preparing for this, I thought what might be helpful is to kind of share my own leadership journey and sort of how I've gotten to where I am today with sort of three vignettes or stages, I guess, of my growth in different roles over the years. And so the first I'll talk about is the company I was the first-time CEO of, a company called Quartet Medicine with Atlas based in Boston. The second, I think, is the sort of founding and early phases of Inara when we were actually a company called Urvax. And then I'll sort of maybe spend a few minutes just on where we are today and that journey to get there. And what I'll try to do in each of these sections is just kind of highlight a couple of the key or a few of the key lessons that I learned along the way that, taken together have sort of led me to sort of my views and how we do things at Inara. So the first step in the journey was, as I mentioned, a company called Quartet Medicine. It was a single asset virtual company focused on a novel treatment for pain that was based on some convergent biology of sort of understanding of the immune system and its crosstalk to the peripheral nervous system. So helped identify the technology, founded the company, raised a Series A, and built out of a team of about 7 of us that were running a kind of fully virtual operation. We were all in an office together. We had research going on all over the place, but a particular emphasis on China. And as a first-time CEO, I think it was a wonderful experience in many ways and an incredibly challenging experience in many ways. And I think, looking back, I think one of the key lessons that I took from that is that, the majority of the time I was just really uncomfortable. And there's times where you're uncomfortable, and that's a good thing because you're being stretched. And there's times where you're uncomfortable because you've got, the little voice in your head saying, I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't be doing this. And I think sort of recognizing that and figuring out how to work through that and build a network of fellow CEOs who, I can have a support and discussions with outside of my board was really, really useful. I think one of the other lessons there, and I think it ties to that first lesson, was I was really excited about the team we built in terms of capabilities. I mean, everybody was excellent at their role and was really driven by the science and moving things forward. But there really wasn't a lot of focus on culture and developing team members. And I think when the times are going well, that's probably fine. And when things, get a bit bumpy, as they inevitably do, it becomes challenging. And I think, I really, having left that role and, reflected on it, it's something I've really taken forward to focus on more as I build my teams. And I guess the final point, and this is a component of team building, right, is thinking about your board and the investors and how to build relationships with them and being able to strike the right balance of, support and mentorship and direction from the board, but also a separation and attention. And I think lots of lessons learned on probably making mistakes there that I've tried to carry on. So it was a great opportunity for me. And I think, was fortunate to have a first-time CEO experience early in my career. And ultimately that ended up, we did an option to acquire deal with Merck, and I was in a position where I could have kept going, but my wife and I sort of always had a desire to move abroad while our kids were little and have this experience. And so we took that opportunity and moved to the UK 5 years ago when I joined Immunocore. So it was great. First time CEO experience and a lot of lessons learned there that, I think everybody goes through as they start their journey in biotech. And then, so that's the first phase. And what I tried to do is, over my time at Immunocore, where I wasn't running we were a big company, we were bigger, 500 people, and had a very different role. As I spent a lot of time working on myself and thinking about my own leadership style, trying to consolidate some of my experience, and then think about what's important to me, what are my values, and how do I want to bring those to life in the work that I do. And so having left Immunocore and getting involved with Anara, that was really at the forefront of my mind as I joined. And so the second vignette is around the early days of Anara, when we were a company called Urvax. So this is a initial set of science focused on basically T-cell antigens in cancer that are derived from previously thought to be non-coding regions of the genome. So some pretty cool science, and our goal was to see, can we basically turn these into targets for immunotherapy, whether they be vaccines or T-cell therapy or whatnot. So really cool science, a lot of promise. And when I joined, we were in the fortunate position of actually already having raised some money. And so not having to go out on day one and raise money was great, because we could really focus on, what do we want to build here and how do we want to do it? And so there was 2.5 FTEs in the company, and we really had a clean sheet to build. And I think one of the things I brought from my earlier experience at Quartet and some of the consolidations of those lessons is, I really wanted to focus on the culture from day one and be deliberate about it. And so, one of the things we did early on was to spend time together as we started to grow the team, working on how we work together, not just the work that we do together, and doing that in a workshop format, and really spending time thinking about that. And we started with purpose. And what is the purpose of our organization? And then what are the values and sort of behavioral norms and how we want to engage? And I think clarifying those early on both helped us come together as a growing team, but also helped us think very clearly about who we wanted to add and bring into that team as we scaled. And really has served us well as we've scaled and gone through, the inevitable ups and downs that you do. And I think the other thing that I've learned through this journey is, one, it's also, each company is going to have their own cultural journey, and you really need to be alive to that. And so you can try things, and some things are going to work and some things aren't. So you really need to be able to sense and respond and adapt and work with the people that you're working with to create that for yourself. But you have to be deliberate. I mean, my feeling is you have to be deliberate. You have to take time out to do it. Otherwise it won't happen. And so I think I guess the other lesson there, I would say, is, I've become, I guess, more aware of building the company for what we need today and tomorrow, but not necessarily worrying about things down the road. And what that basically means is the team that we put in place at the founding is, some of those people are here and some of them aren't. And the reason for that is we've evolved as an organization. We've taken on new science. We've evolved the culture. And ultimately, the people that we brought on were great for that early phase of the journey, but not everybody was there, sort of right for the next phase. And I think just kind of embracing that as a reality, both from just the way it is, and then also thinking about, well, how can you do that well? And I think it's just sort of being in tune with, are people happy? Is this the environment they want to be in? And if not, let's just have that honest conversation and say, great, how can we help you find that environment and support them in finding their next role? And so that's something that I think has served those are often conversations that aren't had, or if they're had, they're not had openly. And I think that's important. So that's the sort of early phase. I think one of the, just on our startup journey, one of the things we did then was we went out and tried to raise a Series A in the autumn of 2019 on the back of validating our science and having sort of a pipeline coming together around cancer vaccines, in collaboration with Vaccitech, actually, who co-developed the COVID vaccine on the chimp adeno system with Oxford and AstraZeneca. So a really nice platform. And we had sort of a GMP ready product. But at the time, there's very little interest in early stage antigens for cancer vaccines. Like, it's a lot of risk and a lot of challenges. I see Charlotte nodding. And there have been some high profile failures in the space, right? And so ultimately we were facing a question of, can we raise money? And if not, how do we continue to build the business? And so at the time, we were also thinking about how do we broaden our story a bit and bring in TCRs to the equation based on my experience and some of the experience of my team from Immunocore and Adaptimmune. And we happened to come across a really interesting set of science and TCRs, albeit early, from Andy Stuhl's lab in Cardiff. And ultimately, as we did the diligence, we said, look, let's bring this in, let's make it our lead program, and let's adapt our story. And all of which is in hindsight really easy to say, and in the moment was really hard, right? Because you're saying, look, we've invested in this, we have a team to do this, we're going to kind of swing a little bit. Anyway, long story short, I think that's been the right decision. We were able to raise a Series A right as the pandemic was kicking off last year with RA Capital and Samsara, so some great US early stage VCs, and allow us to really build and expand our company. And so it was at that point I joined full time and have really kind of then invested in our cultural journey and where we've gone from there. So we're now 42 people. We're based in Oxford, and have sort of a broad offering of cell therapy, novel antigens, and sort of finding our way in the world. And so I think through that pivot and through thinking through how do you go from those early phases of just getting the science on the rails and validating to, okay, how are we building a sustainable business here? And then my transition from sort of half-time as the foot in the venture fund to full-time in the company. I think, I basically spent a lot of time thinking about myself and what's important to me and trying to, again, consolidate the earlier phases of my journey. And so I guess where I'm at today is very much embracing leadership as service to others, and how do we, and that being something I can do, but everybody can do. So leadership should be everywhere in our company, and I think I've really done that and try to foster that in our team. Of that is, I think it's you can get advice and you can seek advice, but a lot of the how to do that well sits inside each of us, and so there's a big inward reflection and personal journey there. And then we've really focused on the culture work that we do. And so the themes for our culture are really around promoting autonomy and independent teams and independent decision-making, breaking down of traditional hierarchy. And we have a set of tools that we use to do that, being very purpose-led, and having that present in our work every day. And then creating an environment where really people try to, as much as possible, feel free to be themselves. Right? We don't need to be all best friends, but we're all human beings who have each had a lived experience and bring a diversity of ideas and backgrounds. And, we're just all going to be richer and I think better off together if we can embrace that and interact like that, and the work will be done better. And so those are some of the themes that we bring through. And then I think increasingly we've really focused on hiring for cultural fit. I mean, I think we're fortunate that there are a lot of really capable people out there in terms of their backgrounds, but we've tried to bring in cultural fit as the forefront of what we do, to ensure we can keep this going. Yeah, so look, those are some of my lessons, sort of maybe in a consolidated Russian doll style to where I am today, and hopefully helpful as an introduction. I'm certainly happy to discuss and pick up themes of this as we go through the panel discussion.
Fantastic, thank you, Kevin. And I feel like what you've just done there is open lots of rabbit holes for us to potentially dive down later. So lots of questions, I think, can come out of that. Thank you. And Natalie, I think you're going to share your perspective with us next, so I'll hand over to you.
Yes, I agree with you, Charlotte. I mean, Kevin has opened an enormous box of questions and answers, and of course, I can go through what we do, which is, as I said earlier on, we are completely dedicated to life science and to building companies, often from scratch, from the petri dish all the way to commercialization. But in fact, I think if you can move the slides forward. Yes. So as I said, we offer the executive search, the organizational and people development aspect. So we delve with organizations and see who doing what, because often people will want to recruit in a very ad hoc fashion. So they will want to say, oh, I need this, I need that, I need that person, I need that other person, and in the end you end up with a kind of big bag of people, and you lose perspective of where you are going, what is the journey, what you want to achieve. And those people might be only temporary, but they are there and you don't know what to do with them. So this is a lot of work we do with companies. And of course, all the mentoring which comes with experience, 30 years in industry. You can imagine, we build bridges, we build relationships over time, people evolve and we follow them and be there for them. So that's us. We are, as I said earlier on, in different locations. Charlotte said, how do you manage all these locations? Well, actually, it's quite easy because we are a very tight team and we meet today on Zoom, but otherwise face-to-face very, very often. And we are on WhatsApp, on all this media, which keeps us together and as a very clients and needs focused rather than looking at ourselves and dealing with our own problems. I mean, the culture in Viridis to talk about this, following what Kevin said, is very much to be at the service of others rather than be introverted and looking at our own problems, if there is any. We keep our problems to ourselves. We will have sessions for it. We will think about it. But our first purpose in life is to be of service to others, to companies who need some perspective, who need the big picture. And that's what we bring, because, we deal with about 60 companies per year, at least. And over the years, you can imagine how many companies that is, the number. And then the number of people, when we do a search, we approach about 70 people per search, at least. Yeah, roughly. So, and we keep in touch with a lot of people. So over the years, you can imagine the network we have, and it's not a network for the sake of having a network. It's actually people we keep in touch with. We organize sessions to catch up and to make sure that we understand where they're at, how the industry is evolving. So that gives us also a lot of insight about the trends. To go back to leadership, which is really the theme of today, it's actually the key of when you create a company, or when you want to grow a company. It's never going to be as easy and simple as it seems. So, for instance, you're not going to have one role, or I need that one person and another person. No, when you build a company, you actually build strengths and weaknesses together. You, of course, everyone technically is going to be competent, otherwise you would not approach them. And there are a lot of people who are competent technically, but beyond that technical competency, what you're going to try is to build that balance between people in terms of their, as I said earlier on, their strengths, their weaknesses, their personalities, in order to have a balanced team and to have people who can work really together intelligently, understanding each other's language, both intellectual, emotional, body language, and it's difficult. It's an art, I would say. So we can move because the slides are. I can move on. Yeah. So yes. So the keys to that really is in any organization, including the work we do and the advice we give, is always remain flexible and adaptable. And as Kevin pointed out very well, it's take care of now, take care of maybe tomorrow, but don't think too much about what's going to happen in a few years' time. Because if you take care of today and tomorrow, and if you are flexible and remain alert, the rest will follow. It's very rare that that's the way it works. It doesn't work the way around. So in other words, you're not going to have a plan, a 5 years plan, although of course, with investors and you need to have that kind of business approach. But actually, when you are in your company, if you take care of the today very carefully and very and dedicatedly, I would say, the rest will follow in a kind of way which makes sense. You need to be in close partnership, in close conversation with your team, and your partners, your external partners. You need to be able to question. You need to be in an environment where trust and transparency and open dialogue exists in order to be able to question, challenge in a way which is never hurtful, but positive and provocative and conducive to a solution. So yes, I said already that we are in 4 different locations. And in fact, we cover the US, Europe, from Brittany to Moscow, from the Nordics to South Africa, covering EMEA. And some points in Asia, but for instance, we don't cover China mainland. We do Japan and several countries in Asia, but not China. The questions I would like to have for you to think about when we have our open conversation is really, when you hire people, you need to have sort of analyzed what is your strategy, short, mid-term, long-term. I said long-term is maybe not that necessary, but have something to offer in terms of strategy, but more to the point in terms of vision and visibility, because people will buy in, they buy you as a person, and they'll buy a project in which they can see themselves impacting, being part of, being welcomed into. That's what I mean by thinking of your strategy. It's a vision, it's a visibility that you can offer at any point in time to your collaborators and teams. So we've got an example here, because we had a few C-suite to set up. And the questions, the previous questions in previous slides, I'm sorry, I can't control that, but can we go back to the previous slide? Yes, the timing, the budget, the talent in-house, as I was explaining earlier on, sometimes you recruit in an ad hoc way, which is not the best way. You need really to have the big picture of what you would like your team to look like within the next 12, 18 months. And the skills needed, but they also which kind of space and room and for them to develop, for each of them to develop and come to their full performance into the company. And So the best hiring strategy very often is going to be a mix of all that, sitting down with the people involved in that hiring process. And it's going to be a journey. And you will see that often from the minute you start that hiring process, that search process, to the point of hiring, so that's a start to end process, we work together, we roll on together. There is nothing cast in stone. There is nothing which can be changed. There is, of course, with our conversations with potential candidates, our conversations with you, and the conversations we have with candidates, you realize that maybe what you had in mind is not what you really, really need. And ideally is to get to what you really, really need, and see that as maybe one hiring or more than one hiring or no hiring at all, and organizing things differently in-house. So yes, so I was saying about that company, which is in cell and gene therapy. Actually, it's a company which is on two different pillars. One is small molecules in phase 2. For rare disease, and then gene therapy also in the same space, but a completely different modality of action. And with the NASDAQ New York sort of in view at 18 months, 2 years. And we had those 3 positions which they needed in order to prepare for that listing, to prepare their C-suite and be able to do a successful listing. So the next slide, maybe. So we decided to show you the CSO, which actually was based who is now based in the US, and although the company itself is based in Europe. So you can see that we really had to prod and to understand if that person could work autonomously, could take initiative, could communicate easily, could carry the image and of the company in the US, because that person was the first person hired in the US, and therefore it was really important that first of all the communication with the CEO, who is still in Europe, and the rest of the team and the R&D team, who is in Europe in a different town. I mean, that kind of leadership, that kind of capabilities of adapting to different cultures and growing an image of international, a global company in the US, you need a certain type of people. Not everyone can do that. You can be a fantastic scientist and not be able to get that. And in fact, technically, we saw a lot of people, but there was only a handful, really, even less than that, who could not only bring the technical assets and skills and experience, but have that mindset, those communication skills, that type of leadership, which is quite exceptional, that charisma. So that's it. I mean, that's us. That's what we do day in, day out. With a lot of energy, a lot of love and care, because I think if you don't believe in what you're doing, it's extremely difficult to cope with this amount of people that you have to deal with and constantly manage their susceptibilities, their aspirations, and their frustrations. So it's a lot of work. That's it.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, I think one of the things that I heard there was around kind of thinking about a team holistically and how you balance that and what the team as a whole might have when and where, and maybe a common theme from Kevin there around it's a journey and people are going to potentially come and go within our teams. Brilliant. Okay, well, looks like it's just me, and then we can get on to the interesting bit of some backwards and forwards, and as they come, I can see a couple of questions in the Q&A, but feel free to keep dropping them in. Okay, I was trying to think about how best to kind of share some of my thoughts on team building and learning in a kind of 10-minute slot, and I thought that actually coming back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a kind of Maslow's hierarchy of teams might be an interesting way to structure our thinking. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this, this is a kind of common theory of human motivation. And at the bottom here, we've got our kind of basic needs around food, water, warmth, rest, kind of security. Up here, we've got our psychological needs. So this is esteem and love and belonging, which links to our relationships, the prestige and our sense of accomplishment. And then at the top here, we have this kind of self-actualization, this self-fulfillment, or essentially our, fulfilling of our full potential. And as I was thinking about what are we trying to do when we're building our teams for success, I thought this actually presents quite an interesting framework for us to think through the kind of core fundamentals that we need to have in place as we strive to elevate our teams to a point where they are the best that they can possibly be. So starting at the bottom here, this is kind of the foundation of our pyramid. So we could think about this as the very basic needs of our team. And I think this last year of COVID has been an assault for many of our teams actually on this core foundation. So in many instances, our working environment has been really challenging. On Theolytic's team, we've had people with children screaming in the background and trying to balance parenthood and various very challenging working from home environments with continuing to contribute and do a great job. We're predominantly a wet lab based company, so for those individuals that were coming into the lab, in some instances actually had real fears around their safety and their health. So how do we support in that way? Also, I'm sure all of us know individuals that actually lost their jobs last year, and how is that impacting on our teams when they're looking around and they might have other team members, or they themselves might have been furloughed. They might know other individuals that are losing their jobs. So I think that sense of kind of safety within a role, with biotechs, we have these fluctuating funding cycles, and how do we support our teams during times of extreme uncertainty? And really recognize that for many, it's like a very core fundamental assault potentially on our safety. Another thing I think that feeds into this base of the pyramid kind of is around conflict. So is there unresolved conflict within our teams? Can we identify that? Do people feel comfortable to kind of surface and talk about that? And another area, do people understand and have clarity on what their personal goals and responsibilities are? Do they know what the expectations are of them that allow them to feel comfortable that they know if they are or are not meeting them, kind of thing? And then super basic, are our salaries fair? Are they, in line with basis? Are the members of our team able to protect themselves and their families and live in the geography that we're building our companies? So this kind of very, very basis of our hierarchy of teams, Maslow's hierarchy of teams, I think really prompts some pretty fundamental questions that we have to ask ourselves. We can't ask our team members to be self-actualizing if we're not getting some of these very core things right. This second level is, I think, where things start to get interesting. Do we have clear shared values and mindset that bind us together? Have we explicitly agreed on how we want to show up? And Kevin touched on the expectations of how we want to be with each other, not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it. Do we have mechanisms built in where we can give and receive great feedback? Especially, I think, in the kind of British culture, we're not always good at saying exactly what we think. And so in some instances, do our team need some training on actually giving and receiving feedback? And, you know, when we're doing that across cultures, which, you know, many of us will, I hope, be building very diverse teams, different people will give and receive feedback in different ways. Has there been a discussion on how we like to do that, so that can be set up? I think both Kevin and Natalie touched on kind of bringing our teams together regularly. I think Natalie said, you know, we come together all the time, either on Zoom or not, even though there's that disparate network. So as leaders, are we creating opportunities for our team to connect meaningfully, perhaps both in and out of work? And how can we support people to take risks and admit mistakes and share learnings, and for that to be a positive thing so that we can kind of come together and get better together? And then I think that a key thing here, elevating above the individual, is, does everybody have a broad understanding of the team as a whole, where each individual is contributing and where they themselves kind of fit within that structure? And, you know, listening to Natalie talk about working with 60 companies a year and like 70 individuals for each search, that level of complexity, you know, balancing these really complex problems that we're working on within our teams takes a huge amount of communication and transparency, and, you know, very conscious kind of time and energy to make sure that everybody has the full picture. And then finally, right at the top, so this is where we're all aiming for, right? And I think I know that Kevin and I have a relatively aligned philosophy, I think, on teams. And I heard a few themes come out in terms of, he referenced autonomy. How do we allow the individuals within our teams to have that autonomy? Does everybody understand the company's purpose? Are we all running in the same direction? And is that purpose audacious? You know, is it exciting? Is it inspiring? And then finally, you know, does every individual within your team have an opportunity to develop and learn and master their skills? And, you know, in some instances, there are some roles that are relatively monotonous. You know, without attention, you can end up doing the same thing over and over again, whether that's kind of processing accounts or splitting cells or whatever that might be. So are there opportunities for us to introduce a bit of kind of diversity in task in terms of each individual's role within the team? And there's actually a book that I've loved on this kind of top rung, which I'd wholeheartedly recommend, which is called Drive by Daniel Pink. And this talks about the ingredients that an individual needs to really thrive in terms of their own self-motivation. And these three things being kind of purpose, autonomy, and the opportunity of mastery. So I think this is what I would put in this top bracket, and would love to discuss any kind of ideas or thoughts that you guys might have around that. So that was a whistle stop tour of some of thoughts that I've had. And I wonder if we start off with, I know, Sam, you had a question that you wanted to ask the whole group about what is most important to teams. Is now a good time for us to put that to the audience? Oh, there we go. So at this point in the discussion, we're curious to learn what you think is the most defined or most important factor of making a biotech company successful. Is it the product? Is it technology? Is it the money that a company has, or is it the people within the team? And then the second question here, what is the most important thing that you guys look for when you hire? And this links, I think, to some of Natalie's points Is it skills? Is it kind of hardcore competencies? Or is it mindset and culture? We're not allowed to vote, but I think we're all quite biased, probably. Fantastic. So we'll let that complete now. Is that done? The anticipation. Oh gosh, interesting. Okay, so we've got a real split here. We've got 50% of people saying it's all about the product or the technology. Nobody says it's to do with the money, and about 50% of people saying that it's all about the people. But then interestingly, we've got quite a split on this second question. So about 12% of you guys think it's kind of skills, core competency, and 88% on mindset. And I think this actually links really nicely to one of the questions that has come into the Q&A, which is from Jeanette Thomas, who actually wanted to kick off by asking Kevin's view on how to recruit with mindset or cultural fit in mind, if that is what we're indexing for in terms of the team members that we hire. How do you find out cultural fit in interviews? How do you hire for mindset?
Yeah, well, thanks, Charlotte, and thank you and Natalie for sort of great presentations there. A lot of resonant themes for me. I think I think we've tried to just take a holistic approach to this from, how do we write job specs for, that fit the spirit of our company and will, hopefully land and resonate in the most diverse group. And then down to the interview itself, who's in the interview, who's asking technical questions, who's asking fit questions. And, some of the questions we use, they're not really, a couple of my favorites is I love to ask people to tell me about a time they screwed up or made a mistake. Or, what's the biggest decision you've made in the last year and why? And it's really, for me, it's about how, it's about self-awareness, it's about transparency, it's about honesty, it's about authenticity, it's about, being comfortable being yourself and being able to reflect on that. And we have various versions of those questions that we try to integrate into the various interviews that folks do across the company, and it'll depend on the role and how we do it. But I think that's the spirit of it. And I think what I've tried to, and I think why that's important and why it's important to be deliberate about that is, I think oftentimes, especially when we're interviewing for scientists, we want to spend a lot of time having their peers do the interviews, because they'll be the people that are working together every day. And quite frankly, they're probably the best champions of our company and our culture. However, they may not be the most experienced interviewers. And I think it's natural when you're talking to somebody, especially as a scientist, to talk about the science. And that's really important. And you want to make sure you can dive into the science and understand how somebody thinks. But we've actually even recently, one of the recruiting firms that we work with a lot, we brought them in to say, hey, can you train our team on interviewing? And our culture and how we turn up, and can you help our team do better at this? And so again, I think a lot of this is just making sure we're deliberate about it, making sure everybody realizes that this is really important, and then giving some people some training. I thought your comment on feedback training, Charlotte, was brilliant. That's something we do, how to give and receive feedback, formally in terms of everybody on the team. And so, yeah, so that's some of the ways we do it. And then I think that the correlate of that is diversity. And I think that's right. And I think the thing, what we're looking for is not everybody who is going to view life the same way. Right. So I think the beauty of this is really to have people challenge us. And I spend half an hour with everybody when they join at a minimum. And I think the people who are the most skeptical of our culture work is actually great. Right. We're not going to hire anybody who's cynical. There's no place for that. And I think it'll erode the whole thing. But I love that we send everybody a book that's meant to be thought-provoking and inspiring about some of the inspiration for our culture. before they joined, called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. And it's going to hit a lot of people out of left field and really sort of strike them. And so, it's great to have people come in and that are skeptical and have never seen this before, or been in organizations where people pay lip service to it but don't really live it. Anyway, so I think we end up with a great sort of diversity in every dimension. I mean, we're close to majority female, I think, sort of depending on the recent hires. We've got people from all over the world, all sorts of lived experience, all sorts of worldviews. I'm going to embrace that and try to bring that in. So it isn't about just hiring to a common denominator, but really just getting to see how people think and how self-aware they are. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about actually actively integrating cultural screens into your interview process. And what occurs to me there is you have to have an understanding of what your culture is in order to decide the kind of culture that you're looking for in your incoming employees. And I wonder, Natalie, how you handle that in teams that are just getting started, that don't necessarily have a kind of clear, this is what our culture looks like yet. They're still creating that.
Yes, I wanted to make a couple of comments on what you said, Kevin, because I think it starts, everyone, you write a brief, a job description of what you have in mind. And often, it's a bit of a shopping list. I would like this, I would like that, da, 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 da. But in fact, I think it's important already in the brief to articulate what's in there for the people who might be interested in your position. Because in other words, very often it's I want this, this, and that. But you should be, as a hiring person, think if I were that person to be hired, what is in there for me? And I think it's important to actually articulate that in your job description. Not many people think about it, but when we write job description, when we talk about positions and organizations with our clients, we say, but hang on a minute, okay, but what do you think they're going to look for? And then try to write it down, try to express it, because then it makes you change from one side of the table to the other side of the table. And the other comment I would like to make is that, and this is from a candidate's perspective, I encourage them to cross-reference the people they're going to work with. So in other words, we do it naturally as being the hiring people. You cross-reference, you try to find out on LinkedIn who they are linked up with, and then you call who might know, etc. But they should do it too, especially in small companies, because they need to know where you're coming from, who you are in previous life. You're not coming ex nihilo. You're coming from a background, from a community. And I would encourage people to do that, to cross-reference the people they're going to work with. And I do it, actually. I say.
And Natalie, is that talking about if you're applying to a company?
Yes.
You should be diligencing that company inside out in the same way that they're diligencing you.
Yes, absolutely. Look, it's only through thorough communication and due diligence. The same way like when investors are going to invest in your company, and Kevin, I'm sure you know that, they're going to look into every single aspect of your company. They're going to lift every stone, every piece of carpet, and they're going to ask very embarrassing questions because they're going to invest money, which is their money or their pool of money, and they better know. Right? And the same, somebody who is having a career it's not just a career. They want to be part of a community where they feel comfortable, they feel welcome, and they're going to impact, and they're going to contribute, and they're going to really give something to that company. Don't you think that this is an investment? This is also an investment. So they need to do that due diligence of those people they're going to work with. And it's not just the product of how much money they've got in the kitty. It's really the people. Can I work with these people? So
really,
that's
really, yeah, no, really interesting and important point. And I think actually that's, I mean, I know from my perspective, if somebody is applying to the Thealytics team and they reach out to me on LinkedIn and they're like, I want to know more about the company, or, you know, they reach out to people within the company through whatever means to do their diligence. I think that's something that we hold in very high regard, because it's like you understand and recognize the value of your time and your contribution, and, you know, you're really looking into that. I wonder, there's a question that's coming in here from which is, you know, in the previous panel, a group of investors suggested that actually the technology is the most important part, because all other parts of the team, including the founders, are replaceable, but the technology is core. Does the panel agree? I wonder, Kevin, you've unmuted, and I know you talked about the journey of people coming and going, so maybe this is a good one for you to jump in on.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, and you know, this is we could spend a whole another hour just talking about this. I mean, look, I think the beauty of what we do, right, is that all of these companies that get started and get funded are going to have great technology, right? Some will be better than others, some will be more applicable than others, and some may play out, some may not. So I kind of look at it the other way around. Investors aren't investing unless the technology is great. But I just think, and for sure, we're all replaceable. I mean, like, I'm under no illusions that, you know, I could come out of my next board meeting and be told, you know what, this has been wonderful. Why don't you take some time off? And, you know, I just think that's absolutely wrong. And I think the biggest tension I have in my job is, how do I be true to my values and the culture that were created in our company, yet interact with and participate in our board, who have very different views of leadership, have very different views of the value of culture, and have very different goals and time horizons. And it is what it is. And they're fabulous human beings, right? It's not that there's any better or worse, but they're very, very different. And you know, I think the biggest tension I have is, how do I manage both of those? And I'm still learning. But I just think that's absolutely not true. And I think, you know, our case study is an example, right? I mean, we had to pivot technology, even though we loved our founding technology and we had raised, you know, 15 million to get it off the ground, but it wasn't going to be enough. And how did we do that? We did it based on the people that we had and the ability to work through that. So, you know, look, I think I'm not surprised by that comment, and I wholeheartedly disagree with it.
I noticed that during your talk, Kevin, you talked about the value of kind of your mentorship team and your CEO group, and I think it's interesting actually to think about your board, or our boards, as a kind of team unto themselves. The dynamics are very different, as you say. It's often slightly more challenging, probably in many instances, in different ways. That tension is very definitely there. But I think in the last few minutes, I wonder if we all have kind of something that we want the audience here to take away from what we've shared today. That time has flown by. I can't quite believe it's 2 minutes too. But I think just on that last point, the thing that I would probably want to just summarize from my side would be, you know, we have to strive for the top of that pyramid with our teams. You know, we are aiming for building the most high performance, best team we can, where people can thrive and deliver their best work. But we also have to keep in mind the other rungs of that pyramid, especially when times get tough, because that's when there's going to be, that's when you know, things can fall apart. Natalie, were there any final things that you wanted the audience to take away today?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, going back to what Kevin said about the cultural fit, I think it's, and it's coming into what you said, Charlotte, is when times get tough, that the cultural fit, the good, cohesive team is going to sort out a company. Because actually, quite frankly, you can see a lot of technologies lying around on shelves, you know, you can get to them. But if you don't have a good team, it's never going to happen. And the point is, actually, you see investors taking always one team with a successful team, with a winning team, from one company to the next. So how can they say that it's all about the technology when actually they nurture a little team behind the scene and that team pops up over and over again in successful companies? Huh?
Jolyon, your question has been well and truly answered there, I think, with another challenge. Kevin, final things you'd like everyone to take away?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the final thing for me is that, you know, at the end of the day, people really matter, and they matter as human beings. And I think just having that at the core of our companies not only takes away from all of the bad company experiences people have, so it's subtractive of the negative, but done well is such a force multiplier for good for our businesses, good for each other, and good for society that, you know, we all need to move to a view, in my opinion, where that's at the core of what we do. And I think in doing so, you know, hopefully can really change things.
It's not to say that, you know, a team can't change. You know, it's not a team forever. You know, you see that you've got a CEO for one time of the period of the company, and then, you know, so no one is permanent. But each time you need to renew that feeling of assessing the culture of the company, assessing the cultural fit, who works well together for each stage of the company. You know, it's not forever, but it does. I mean, it's all about people, because the people will get the money if they are trusted, if they come across as a strong team.
Wonderful. I think some controversial subjects covered there, which is always good and makes a good discussion. So Jane, thank you on behalf of all of us, I think, for hosting us today, and for everyone that's been here. It's great questions. Thank you for sharing that time.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte and Kevin and Natalie. Really fascinating discussion. I feel a sort of a panel battle coming on at some point, but and all of these topics are things I think that we could go on for much longer about. So an hour is definitely not enough, but lots of ground covered and lots of really sort of fascinating insights. So thank you so much to all of you. And I hope that some of these, I'm pretty sure, well, Jolyon is with us later for Founder Stories, so perhaps we can pick up on a couple of these topics later in that panel. That would be good to revisit. But now we are going to, well, you've got two options. The first is to go and join Barbara and Emma on the session about data-driven health startup ecosystem in the UK and the role of KQ Lab. So if you're interested in that, please do go and join them on that other Zoom call, which you can access from Swapcard, or you have 45 minutes for your one-to-one meetings before our next session, which starts 3:45, the Founder Stories. So really looking forward to hearing from Antoine, Caroline, Jolyon, and Noor and Olivia. So that would be fantastic. So yes, have a great 45 minutes, and I will see you back here at 3:45. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.